Lanterns bobbed like fireflies in the darkness, illuminating faces etched with a mixture of excitement and reverence. Tonight was no ordinary night. The moon hung unusually large and low, its pale light spilling like liquid silver across the placid surface of the lake. It was a sight that had drawn the entire village together, from the oldest elders to the youngest children, all eager to witness and celebrate what many whispered was a blessing from the heavens. Elias Morrow moved through the crowd with a familiar solitude, his lean frame cloaked in a weathered coat that had seen many seasons. His deep-set eyes, shadowed by years of hardship and loss, were fixed not on the revelry but on the moon itself. It hung there, impossibly close, its glowing orb seeming to hover just over the treetops, casting a luminous path across the water. Around him, laughter rose and fell, fires crackled, and the sweet notes of a fiddle filled the night air. Yet for Elias, the beauty of the scene was tinged with a gnawing sense of unease. He found a quiet spot on the rocky shore, where the water lapped gently at his boots. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the surface, fragmented by the slightest ripple, but still hypnotic in its glow. As he gazed into the depths, memories stirred of a time before the tragedies, before the village had grown so distant and wary. He thought of his wife, gone now these many years, and the silence that had settled over his life since. Yet beneath the sorrow was a sharper edge, an instinctual warning that something was not right. The villagers around him were caught in a collective trance, their eyes drawn to the orb that seemed to pulse with an unnatural light. Children pointed upward, their voices bright with wonder, while the elders exchanged knowing glances, some whispering prayers under their breath. Mara Lauren, tall and sharp-eyed, wove through the crowd, her green gaze scanning the faces with a protective vigilance. She paused near Elias, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement before turning her attention back to the gathering. Mara's presence was a reminder of the village's fragile balance between hope and fear, between the past and the unknown future. As the moon appeared to sink fractionally lower, the air seemed to thicken, the sounds of celebration momentarily dimming. A hush fell, subtle but charged with anticipation, as if the very lake held its breath. Elias's gaze flickered to the water's surface, where the reflection shimmered with an eerie intensity. For a moment, shapes seemed to flicker beneath the glow, distorted, fleeting forms that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Most villagers remained oblivious, caught in the enchantment of the descending moon, but Elias's heart tightened with dread. Sheriff Caltaine stood nearby, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the firelight, eyes scanning the crowd with a cautious pragmatism. He was a man who sought order in the face of uncertainty, skeptical of the tales and superstitions that clung to Glimmer Hollow like moss on stone. Yet even he could not deny the strange gravity that pulled at the village tonight. The moon's descent was no mere celestial event. It was a portent, a mystery that would unravel the fabric of their lives. As the first strains of a folk song rose again, mingling with the crackling fires and whispered stories, Elias remained rooted to the shore. The moon's glow bathed his weathered face, illuminating the lines carved by grief and resolve. The village celebrated beneath the fading sky, unaware of the shadow that stretched quietly across the water of darkness, waiting to be unleashed. And as the moon continued its slow, hypnotic descent, Elias knew that the night's wonder would soon give way to a terror none of them could have imagined. The moon's reflection rippled once more, and in its depths, the faintest whisper of movement stirred. A chill ran through Elias, sharp and sudden, as the boundary between the familiar and the unknown began to dissolve. The celebration would not last. The lake, the moon, and the villagers were bound together now in a dance of light and shadow, of beauty and dread. And Elias, watching the descending orb, felt the first tremors of a nightmare stirring to life beneath the surface. Along the water's edge, clusters of villagers had gathered, their faces illuminated by the moon's unusually bright and close descent. It was unlike any other night in memory. The moon's silvery light spilled over the lake like liquid mercury, casting long, trembling shadows that danced among the trees and whispered secrets to those brave enough to listen. Laughter and low murmurs filled the air, a fragile veneer of celebration masking the subtle tremors of unease beneath. Children darted between adults, their voices sharp with excitement as they chased the moon's silvery glow reflected on the water's surface. Lanterns flickered here and there, their warm light a soft counterpoint to the cold luminescence above. Elias Marrow stood slightly apart from the crowd, a silent sentinel watching the spectacle. His eyes, deep set and shadowed by the weight of past sorrows, traced the moon's path as it seemed to inch ever closer to the lake. The reflection rippled and shimmered, a hypnotic dance of light that held a strange allure. Yet beneath the surface of wonder, a tightening knot of dread coiled in Elias's chest. The memory of his younger brother's disappearance lingered like a ghost, an ache beneath the night's beauty, as the villagers recounted old tales and speculated on the moon's bizarre behavior. Their voices wove a tapestry of lore and fear. It was then that Mara Lorne approached, her presence a sharp contrast to the revelry. Tall and fierce-eyed, Mara moved with purpose, her gaze searching the crowd until it landed on Elias. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of recognition and unspoken questions passing between them. "Are you watching the moon too?" Mara's voice was low, urgent. Elias nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the shimmering lake. "It feels different tonight, like it's closer, too close." Mara's jaw tightened. "My brother vanished last week, just like that, drawn into the reflection, they say. The lake took him." Ilias's grip tightened on the rough fabric of his coat. "I'm sorry, Jonas. He's gone too." For a moment, the crowd around them seemed to fade, the sounds of celebration dimming into a distant hum. The two stood shoulder to shoulder, bound by loss and the shared terror of the unknown. Around them, the villagers' fascination with the moon deepened. Eyes glazed over, fingers reached cautiously toward the water as if sensing an invisible thread pulling them in. Some muttered prayers, others whispered warnings, but all were caught in the lunar spell's growing grip. In the shadows, Elias noticed subtle changes, a twitch in a man's eye, a tremor in a woman's hand. The moonlight seemed to warp reality, bending the edges of the world into something unfamiliar and frightening. Mara's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "We have to find out what's happening, before more of us disappear." Elias met her gaze, a flicker of resolve igniting in his own. "Then we'll start with the lake. Tonight," as the villagers' laughter echoed faintly behind them. The two began to weave through the crowd, their footsteps silent on the damp earth. The moon's reflection shimmered ahead, a gateway to secrets buried beneath the water's deceptive calm. The night was far from over, and with every heartbeat, the boundary between wonder and terror grew thinner. In the village of Glimmer Hollow, the moon was no longer just a distant light in the sky. It was a living presence, a force reaching deep into the hearts and minds of all who dared to watch. And Elias knew, with a chilling certainty, that the true nightmare was only just beginning. Elias Marrow stood at the edge of the lake, the chill wind tugging at his worn jacket as his eyes fixed on the restless ripples. The lake, usually calm and steady, now quivered with a strange unease, as if the water itself were breathing. His gaze was drawn to the moon's reflection, where the familiar orb twisted and warped, rippling into grotesque, unsettling shapes that defied explanation. Elias's jaw tightened as he leaned closer, his breath fogging in the crisp night air. The reflection was no longer a simple mirror of the sky. It was a distortion, a fractured image that seemed alive with malevolence. Shadows flickered beneath the surface, dark shapes darting just beyond the reach of clarity. He felt a shiver crawl down his spine, a primal warning that something deep and terrible was stirring beneath the lake's placid facade. Behind him, the distant murmur of the village crept through the night, a low, restless hum of voices tinged with unease. The villagers of Glimmerharlow had begun to show signs of change. Elias had noticed it in the way they moved, their gazes flickering nervously toward the water, the strange murmurs that passed between them in hurried whispers. Faces once familiar were now etched with shadows of fear and confusion. As he turned away from the lake, Elias's steps carried him toward the village square, where a small crowd had gathered beneath the flickering lamps. The night was thick with a restless energy, the air heavy with a tension that seemed to grip the very bones of the town. Villagers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting anxiously toward the water as if expecting something horrific to emerge. Among them, Elias spotted old Mrs. Daly, her hands trembling as she clutched a shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes, once bright and clear, now flickered with a distant, vacant look. Nearby, young Thomas Hales paced nervously, muttering indistinctly about voices calling from the lake. The air thrummed with an undercurrent of paranoia, a collective unease that spread like wildfire. Elias's thoughts were interrupted by a firm hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Sheriff Calton's gruff face looming close, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of concern and impatience. "Elias," the sheriff said, his voice low but steady, "I've heard the rumors, but we can't let fear rule this town. There's no sense in jumping to conclusions. People are scared, that's all. We need calm, not chaos." Elias met Caltain's gaze, the weight of his words settling heavily between them. "This isn't just fear, Caltain," Elias replied, his voice tight. "There's something wrong with the lake. The reflection is not right. And the people, they're changing." Caltan's scowl deepened. "People get restless when the moon's so bright and low. They're imagining things." "I've seen it," Elias insisted. "Ripples that don't make sense, shadows beneath the water, faces in the reflection that shouldn't be there. Something's pulling at this place, and if we don't face it, it'll pull us all under." The sheriff shook his head, clearly unwilling to entertain the idea. "You're chasing ghosts, Elias. Try not to let your grief lead you down a dark path." Frustrated but undeterred, Elias left the square, the sheriff's words echoing in his mind. He walked back toward the lake, the moon's glow casting eerie, elongated shadows across the path. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint, indistinct melody that seemed to call to him, tugging at the edges of his sanity. At the water's edge once more, Elias knelt down and traced a finger through the cool surface. The ripples spread outward, distorting the moon's reflection further until it shattered into a fractured, trembling mosaic. For a moment, he thought he saw a Pfizer pale, watery visage, with eyes like black voids staring back at him from the depths. He jerked his hand back, heart pounding, breath ragged in the stillness. The lake was no longer just a body of water. It was a threshold, a veil between the known and the unknowable. And behind that veil lurked a darkness that threatened to consume everything he held dear. As the night deepened, Elias remained by the lake, eyes scanning the surface for any sign, any clue to the growing madness that gripped Glimmerhollow. The villagers were changing, the moon's influence creeping into their minds like a slow poison. And somewhere beneath the shimmering reflection, something ancient and hungry waited. The lake whispered secrets Elias could almost understand, but the price of knowledge was steep. With every passing night, the boundary between reality and nightmare grew thinner, and Elias feared that soon there would be no returning from the depths beneath the surface. Yet, despite the dread that gnawed at his soul, Elias knew he could not turn away. The village depended on him, and if he was to face the encroaching darkness, it had to be now before the moon ate the lake whole, dragging Glimmer Hollow into its cold, unyielding embrace. He stared upward, the distorted moonlight casting long shadows that danced like phantoms upon the water. And as the lake rippled one last time, Elias whispered a silent vow he would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The night held its breath, waiting for the next ripple to break the fragile stillness, waiting for the madness beneath the surface to rise. And Elias felt the first sharp sting of fear, not for himself, but for all who called Glimmer Hollow home. The villagers had gathered on the docks, their faces bathed in the moon's unnatural luminescence. What moments before had been celebration and wonder was now tinged with an uneasy hush, a collective breath held in anticipation. Elias Marrow stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered hands gripping the railing as his eyes traced the moon's reflection. The water seemed alive, shimmering with a strange fluidity that made the image ripple and warp as if the lake itself were breathing. His heart pounded with a familiar, gnawing dread, one that clawed at memories he'd long tried to bury. A villager, a man named Tom, stepped closer to the water's edge. He was a stocky man in his 40s, with rough hands and a face lined by years of hard labor. Tom had laughed and joked with friends moments before, but now his gaze was fixed, almost entranced by the moon's glow. The crowd murmured softly, watching as Tom reached down to touch the water's surface, his fingers trembling. Then, something impossible happened. The reflection beneath Tom's hand shimmered violently, distorting like a broken mirror. His figure bent and twisted in the undulating light, his features fracturing as if the water sought to consume him. A low gasp rippled through the crowd, and before anyone could react, Tom's form disappeared, swallowed whole by the lake's shimmering depths. The silence that followed was deafening. Eyes wide with disbelief, the villagers stared at the empty spot where Tom had stood moments before. The ripples on the water's surface slowly settling as if nothing had happened. But the horror was undeniable. Ilias's breath caught in his throat. The memories surged, his brother Jonas, lost to the same lake's reflection, the pain still raw and fresh in his mind. This was no accident, no natural phenomenon. Something dark and malevolent was awakening beneath the moon's descending light. Panic erupted. The crowd buzzed with frantic whispers, some crying out for help, others frozen in terror. Sheriff Caltain pushed through the mob, his gruff voice booming over the chaos. Everyone, calm down. There's no need to jump to conclusions. We'll find Tom. But even Caltain's authoritative tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. He glanced nervously at the lake, unwilling to meet Elias's steady, haunted gaze. Elias stepped forward, voice low but resolute. This isn't just the moon playing tricks. I'll find out what's happening and stop it before more people vanish. The villagers looked to him, some with hope, others with fear. The fragile peace shattered, replaced by a growing suspicion that the lake and the moon held secrets darker than anyone dared imagine. As night deepened and the moon sank ever lower, Elias felt a cold certainty settle in his bones. The nightmare was only beginning. The docks emptied slowly, the crowd dispersing into uneasy whispers and hurried steps. Elias lingered, eyes locked on the lake's shimmering surface, the reflection of the moon twisting and pulsing like a living thing. He knew that beneath that hypnotic glow lay a darkness that threatened not only the village, but the fragile thread of his own sanity. He turned away at last, the weight of what was to come pressing heavily on him. Tomorrow he would begin his search. Tonight the moon had claimed its first victim, and Glimmerhollow would never be the same again. Yet in the depths of the lake, where light and shadow danced in unnatural union, something stirred, waiting, watching, hungry for more. Elias's journey into the heart of the lake's dark mystery had begun, and the boundary between reality and nightmare was dissolving with every sinking moment of the moon. The air was heavy with an unseasonable chill, the moon's sickly glow seeping through the skeletal branches above. Night had fully claimed Glimmerhollow, and the village lay silent, save for the occasional cry of a distant loon echoing across the lake. Elias's breath came in shallow puffs, mingling with the cold as he pulled his coat tighter around his thin frame. Each step felt heavier than the last, a physical manifestation of the weight pressing on his mind since the moon began its unsettling descent. The cabin's wooden door creaked open before Elias could knock. Harbin, stooped and wrapped in a patchwork of worn blankets, invited him inside with a nod. The interior was dim, illuminated only by the flickering flame of a lantern and the faint glow of the moon filtering through grimy windows. Shelves groaned under the weight of dusty tomes. Dried herbs hung in clusters, and the scent of damp wood mixed with the faint tang of earth and smoke. "I wondered when you'd come," Harbin rasped, settling into a cracked armchair by the hearth. "There's no time to waste, not with the moon sinking lower each night." Elias nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he took a seat across from the elder. "I need to know, Harbin. What's happening to our village? What is this curse?" Harbin's gaze drifted toward the shadows dancing along the walls. Glimmerhollow's roots run deeper than most care to remember. Long ago, when the village was nothing but a scattering of huts and fishing boats, the founders struck a bargain with forces beyond our reckoning. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to swallow the space between them. "The moon, you see, has always been more than just a light in the sky. It's a gate, a beacon for things that lurk beneath the surface, both water and soul." The elders knew this, but hunger and desperation led them to awaken a power best left undisturbed. Elias swallowed hard, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. What kind of power? "A force tied to the lake itself," Harbin said, his eyes darkening. "An entity born from lunar madness, fed by the souls of those it claims. It waits, patient and eternal, for the moon to kiss the water so it may rise." The fire crackled as the old man's words sank into Elias's bones. Outside, the lake lay still, a perfect mirror for the hellish glow of the descending moon. The surface rippled faintly, as if something just beneath it stirred. "And the disappearances?" Elias asked, voice tight. "The entity's hunger grows with the moon's descent. It reaches out, pulling at the threads of our minds, our fears. Those it claims vanish into its reflection, trapped between worlds." Harbin reached under the table and unfolded a weathered map, its edges frayed and stained. He pointed to several faded symbols marked around the village and the lake's perimeter. "These sites," he explained, "are where the veil thins. The elders once performed rituals here, hoping to control the curse. But such things never stay bound." Elias traced the lines with a trembling finger, the cold sweat on his palm betraying his resolve. "Why, tell me this now?" "Because you're the one who will face it," Harbin replied, voice steady despite his frailty. You've lost much already. The village's fate may rest on your shoulders. A sudden gust rattled the cabin's windows, and the lantern flickered violently. Ilias's gaze snapped to the looming moon visible through the pane, closer, larger, more menacing than ever before. It's coming, Harbin said, eyes locked on the celestial orb. The descent is nearly complete. We must prepare. The room was thick with tension. The ancient curse no longer a distant tale, but a living nightmare clawing at the edges of reality. Elias clenched his fists, the old pain of loss mixing with a new, fierce determination. Then I won't let it consume us, he said quietly, not without a fight. Harbin gave a slow nod, a glimmer of hope flickering in his depths. Good, because once the moon eats the lake, there may be no coming back. Outside, the lake's surface shimmered with the moon's hypnotic glow, the boundary between water and sky blurring beneath the weight of the ancient curse. Elias stepped back into the night, carrying the burden of history and the fragile hope of salvation. As he walked away from the cabin, the wind whispered through the trees like a mournful wail, and the moon sank ever lower, a silent promise of the horrors yet to come. The echoes of the past had awakened, and with them a darkness that would test the limits of sanity and survival in glimmers.